So I'm Michael, if I haven't seen you before. This is Luna. Luna, thank you for making the journey. You've traveled up from Oxford today to join with us.
Yes, sorry guys, I came from Oxford.
Before actually you were even in the UK, you were starting further afield. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background and what it is that brought you over to the UK in the first place?
Sure. I came from China, so I was born there, I grew up there, and I did my undergraduate studies there in Beijing in law. And yeah, I was basically a happy atheist at that time. I would describe myself as that. And I worked for a few years after I graduated from undergraduate. And and then why I came to the UK is because about 8 years ago or 9 years ago, I'm thinking how old I am now. I went to Oxford to study a master's degree in sociology. That's why I was. Yeah.
Okay, so you came over to Oxford all those years ago to a degree in sociology.
Yeah.
And you not only discovered a city which you're still living in, but you also discovered a lot more there as well. So what is it that happened there, and what is it that first sort of drew you to start thinking about God, Jesus, and so on?
Sure. Wow, it's a very big question. I definitely discovered more than my master's degree when I was in Oxford. So as I said, I was a happy atheist in the past, and I never really thought much about religions and let alone Christianity. I never thought I would become a Christian one day. And I think the first time I actually was thinking about big questions in my life was when I was an undergraduate student. So basically, when I was growing up, I was always focusing on my academic study and trying to be a good student in my class and trying to get good marks and make my parents proud. If you're from East Asia, basically, you definitely know what I mean, and I can see a few smiles there. Anyway, so I actually made my parents really proud when I was in the college entrance exam. Do you know that there's a national college entrance exam in China? Some nods. Yeah, it's very competitive. So I did really well. I got the first place in my city, actually. I went to the best university, and I thought I would be really happy at that time. But actually, after I arrived in the university, I had probably my first identity crisis at that time, because I was surrounded by all the best students from all over China. And I was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, if I'm not the best student here anymore, who am I? So I was really seriously kind of doubting the worth of my existence at that time, because I think if I'm not the best student, I can't really tell my parents. Right. And do I deserve their love and all sorts of things. So that was probably the first time I seriously thought about the big questions in my life. And then when I was working for a few years, I still was thinking about, who am I and how am I going to live my life? Because I worked in real estate industry basically for 3 years in Beijing. And when I was working, I thought it was like a kind of a very big life ladder in front of me. Basically, I'm climbing this ladder. So you work and you earn money, you get promoted and you get more successful and you establish a family and you buy a house and then you have a child and you send the child to the best school and you want them to have exactly the same life as you. So I was thinking that what is the meaning of all this kind of pursuit? Okay. So basically, all these questions actually led me to Oxford. And when I was in Oxford, actually, I was thinking like I wanted to take a break from my life and to thought about these questions. So I arrived in Oxford with all these questions going on back in my mind, and I was an international student there. How many international students are here? Whoa, quite a lot. So as an international student here, you will know what I mean. That's in the past, I never understood why English people always talk about the weather. But now, I am the person who always talks about the weather. Because after I arrived, basically, I arrived in October, and then when Christmas was approaching, it was really depressing. So because the day was getting shorter, and the weather was really bad, and during the Christmas break, all the British students just were all gone, and I was...
We'll be offering counseling at the end of this evening for people who are struggling with the sad issue, yeah.
Yeah, so at that time, I was really, really isolated during the Christmas break. And I was invited to a British family, actually, for Christmas lunch. And I thought, why not? Free food.
Yeah.
So sign me up. So I went to the Christmas lunch and I met an English lady there. She was already 76 years old. Her name is Wendy. So Wendy asked me, saying that, Luna, do you know why we celebrate Christmas? Do you celebrate Christmas yourself? And I said, of course. In China, we celebrate Christmas. We give each other gifts and we have good meals together. Of course, I know Christmas. And Wendy told me very briefly about Jesus' story. And she said, this is the reason we Christians celebrate Christmas. And this is why Christmas is so important for us. And she said, do you want to come to church with me? So I looked to her. She was 76 years old at that time, had gray hair. As a Chinese, it's extremely impolite to say no to an old lady like that.
Is that why you came here when I invited you? Because I've got grey hair.
I didn't realize that. No. In my mind, you're always very young.
Oh, okay, good. Yes, good.
I have to say that Michael is my boss. Anyway, so I look at Wendy.
How thin do I look? No, go on. Go ahead.
This is like a job interview now. Right, my identity is in Christ. Anyway, so at that time I looked at Wendy and I thought, okay, I can't really say no. So I said, okay, sure. And Wendy said, can I have your phone number? So I said yes. So I gave her a phone number and she wrote down. And then I thought, that's it. A lot of people ask about your phone number and they said, I will contact you or let's meet up, and it never happens. So I thought it's another case like that. And 1 week later, I got a phone call and Wendy said, I want to bring you to a service in the church, but that is a student service, and that only starts next week. And I'm calling you to say that I haven't forgotten you, and I'm going to call you again next week. So I thought, wow, that is really moving. And 1 week later, she called me again, and she said, let's go to church together. So I went to church. I still remember the first time I arrived at church. Actually, there's a particular turn that I had to turn to see the church door. And when I made that turn, I saw Wendy standing outside of that church, and with her scarf wrapping around her neck, and with gray hair in the wind, and with a big smile on her face. That was January. It was really, really cold. When I saw that scene, my heart was really struck. And I was thinking to myself, why does Wendy love me? Why does she love me? I was completely a stranger to her. I was a powerless international student. I didn't have any resources, connections, whatever, you name it. And I thought, coming from a culture of reciprocity, you always do something for a reason. And when I look at Wendy, I thought to myself, I couldn't explain her love for me. And that kind of love without reason was really, really powerful. Basically, that was how it kept me coming to church, because she was waiting for me. So part of me was thinking, oh dear, I have to come back now because she's waiting. Yeah. So that's how I started exploring.
And so then what happened then in terms of you changing your thoughts and thinking, actually, I can come to trust this? I mean, what was it that brought you to that point? I think I can say yes to Jesus.
Yeah, I think it was quite a long process. I will try to be kind of brief as much as possible. If you want to know more details, you can ask me afterwards.
And if you want to hear the story in Mandarin afterwards, I can give it to you.
Definitely, any language that Michael can speak. Anyway, so at that time, I have to say, when I started coming to church, I was extremely suspicious of the whole thing, because I was worried about being brainwashed. Who knows whether English people are brainwashing people as well. So anyway, so I actually told a few Chinese friends, and I told them that let's go together because I'm too scared to go alone, and we have to come together, and so that we can watch each other, just in case any one of us is going crazy. So we started kind of going to church together, and we joined a Bible study group. So it was a seekers group. So they were basically, the group leader was explaining what Christianity was to us. And I decided to treat all of this as a research project. Just think that's if one day I find the whole thing contradictory or doesn't make sense, I will just stop. But actually, it surprised me that the more I open the Bible, the more coherent I found the Bible is. And I just remember that at that time, every Sunday for the kind of first few sermons I was in, when I was listening to people preaching, I always fell asleep because I thought, why is this guy talking about the same thing again and again? Because every time, whatever he says at the end is Jesus dying on the cross, And actually, that was the point. So actually, I found that when I look at the Bible, at first I thought there are so many books in science, so many authors, but actually every book in the Bible is testifying the same gospel. And every book in the Bible is pointing to the person of Jesus Christ. So I thought, okay, the key is to understand who Jesus is. And so I found the Bible message is extremely coherent, and at the same time, actually at that time I found that there's a lot of evidence to back it up as well. I remember at that time I read a book called The Case for Christ. It was written by Lee Strobel. And Lee Strobel actually studied law in Yale University, so I thought it's quite legitimate. And he worked as a journalist for many years as well. And so I read this book. So basically why he wrote this book is because his wife became a Christian and he was an atheist. And he wanted to prove that his wife is wrong. And now in marriage, I can understand how strong motivation can be. So he took a 2-year-long project basically to investigate the evidence for Jesus' resurrection. He went around the world to interview people, historians, archaeologists, and everybody that knows something about it. And at the end of that 2 years, he became a Christian himself, and he wrote this book. So I really appreciated his attitude, and I thought that is really, really great. That's looking for some hardcore evidence. And I read this book as well, and I just found the whole thing really, really eye-opening to me, because I never realized that Jesus really existed in history, and he actually was born in Palestine, and he actually grew up as a real human being among us, and he died on the cross, and there are actually historical evidence for that. So that was really, really eye-opening for me, and I think it challenged me as well, because in the past I always thought when my Christian friends said that they have faith in Jesus, I thought faith is just some kind of, you believe whatever that you want to believe. But actually I realized that when they talk about faith, it's not any kind of blind faith that you might have, or they just happen to leave their brain at the door and they leap into the darkness. But actually it's a very intelligent confidence that is based on something or someone you think that is worthy of trust. And that is based on evidence, and that is in line with reason. So I think that was a biggest challenge actually in my exploration of Christian faith.
And do you remember the moment when you were thinking, shall I become a Christian? Do I say yes to this or not? Do you remember that?
I do, because I was determined to not to become a Christian actually at that time. So it's very interesting because as I said, I found the Bible very coherent, and I found a lot of external evidence to back up the claims in the Bible as well. But still, I couldn't make up my mind to become a Christian, because in my head I always thought, what if I become a Christian, what shall I do after I go back to China? What will my parents say? What will my friends say? And a lot of these kind of questions. Because actually, if you're from East Asia, you know what I'm talking about is a kind of collective identity. So we never see ourselves as an isolated individual. We always see kind of what other people think or feel about our decision. So actually, I had another conversation with Wendy one day. I thought I just wanted to give her a heads up that I'm not going to become a Christian, just in case she found out at the end.
And she was disappointed.
Yeah, he's too disappointed. And I really appreciated her spending time with me as well. So we sat down. I said, Wendy, you see, we have been coming to church for a long time, and we still have a lot of questions, and we don't think that we'll become Christians, before we go back to China. And Wendy said, hold on for a second. Who are we? And I said, we, just me and my Chinese friends. And Wendy said, okay. She said, maybe it's time for you to jump out of that we and think, what is God's story with you? So she said, God has a unique story with every person. So maybe that is the time for you to jump out of that we and think, what is your story with God? So that really struck me. And I went back and I thought, I have two choices. So basically, either I respond to the message, everything that I've heard in the last year in the way that I trust it is true, and I want to follow Jesus, or I can go back and pretend that everything I've heard, that never happened. And I thought I can't just go back and pretending that I've heard nothing. But I've actually heard the message, I've heard about Jesus, I've read everything about him, and I've experienced his love through the people around me. And I decided, okay, even though I still have lots of questions, but I have enough evidence to say that I trust him as a person, I want to follow him. So that's, so at the end I became a Christian just before my graduation, actually. And ended up staying in Oxford since then.
Yeah, and I know you did even more study and extra degrees, which I know, we won't go into all of that because you have so many, and you're now working on your doctorate in the field of sociology, right?
Yeah.
That's right. It's a study of why I'm such a great leader. And but how did that change you then? What changed after you became a Christian?
Yeah, I think the biggest change I've experienced after I became a Christian is the freedom that I've experienced. So do you remember at the beginning I said about kind of how well I did in my studies in China, that kind of thing. But even though I worked really hard, I studied really hard, and I did relatively well at that time, I never enjoyed studying. Because studying to me was a tool to achieve some other things and to please my parents and to make them feel proud and to make me feel better. And I had to study well. So studying at that time was somehow entangled with my identity, with who I am, with how I see myself. So actually, I never really enjoyed it. But actually, after I became a Christian, I realized one thing when I restarted this doctoral studies, and I realized that actually, because my identity is rooted in Christ and in God's love for me, and actually has freed me and liberated me from worrying about other people's expectations, how other people think about me, and freed me from pleasing other people and constantly kind of having to meet some people's expectations. So actually it has freed me to enjoy the study more and to really see it as an opportunity to know more about the world and to serve the world and to serve the Lord as well. So I think that is the biggest difference. And actually that has freed me to love my parents better, in a better way as well. Because in the past, I was always thinking about how to please them and meet their expectations. But now, actually, I'm learning how to love them and serve them and really pay attention to their needs and listen to them. So actually, our relationships, actually, compared to before, is much better now.
Wow. That's what. If there's one last thought you'd like to leave with the students here, what would it be?
I would say, if you are not a Christian yet, and be open-minded and keep going, and the Lord loves you more than you imagine. And I want to say that, when we talk about Christianity, this word, we probably mean a lot of different things. You probably have a lot of different assumptions about Christianity. And when we talk about God, this word, you probably have had a lot of assumptions about God in your head as well. And I would say that to be open-minded and really open the Bible, open one of the Gospels, see Jesus, and look at what Jesus said and what he did, and who he said he is, and really see how much Jesus has loved you, and to the point that he died for you on the cross. And that's the thing I really, really want to encourage you to do, to read the gospel. And when I don't know whether you've thought about this question before, but when I was growing up, sometimes I was thinking whether in the world there's somebody actually loves me so much that is willing to die for me. Yeah. But actually there is. And this Jesus. So really get to know this person who loves you to the extent that he was willing to die for you. Yeah.
Thank you, Luna. Why don't we say thanks for Luna for coming up and joining us this evening. Thank you. Well, it's the last evening I'm with you, and I've certainly enjoyed myself. I hope those of you who've been coming along to some of the lunchtimes and evenings have found them helpful too. After a series of events that some of the people I work with were involved with recently, someone actually came up at the end and he said, I've been listening to all of you, and I have to admit I'm still confused, but at a much higher level than I was before. And I hope that you might feel slightly differently about that. And really this evening, as far as is possible, I would like to try and bring as much clarity as I know how into this particular question about faith and trust and what it actually is. Because this idea that the Christian faith is a leap into the dark is something that you hear a lot. But interestingly, if you read through the Bible, you'll see obviously that phrase is never used, not at all, in any way, shape, or form. To become a Christian is always described as a stepping into the light. And the interesting thing about light is it helps you actually see something that isn't there. Now, it's a little bit unfortunate that we've driven a philosophical wedge between the categories of truth and revelation. And although Immanuel Kant had some good reasons for wanting to try to make some distinctions there, when someone tells you the truth or is explaining something to you, or you're looking at a situation and it looks very confusing and you just don't understand what's going on, or maybe, and I'm sure this obviously never happens with the quality of teaching you have, you walk out of a lecture theatre and you go, what was all of that about? If someone can sit down and explain it to you so you can see the truth, as that dawns on you, you suddenly go, oh, I see it now. And that's how we use that phraseology in relationship with truth. It reveals things as they actually are so that we can see them. And the incredible thing about light is it helps us to see things as they really are. And therefore, Jesus' claim to be the light of the world and to be able to show and reveal things as they really are is incredibly important. Now, I remember just after I became a Christian, very often people would come and they'll talk with me and they'll say, Michael, I'm just so happy for you that you've become a Christian because you're so happy. And then they would say, and I wish I could believe what you believe, but I can't. But I'm just so happy for you. And the first time I heard it, I thought, I suppose that's quite nice. And then I heard it again and again and again. And then I started hearing it in different countries. And I thought, why does everybody say the same thing to me when they find out I'm a Christian? I'm so happy for you. I wish I could believe what you believe, but I can't. And what I realized they were actually saying was this. They were saying, Michael, I can see that Christianity means so much to you and that Jesus has really changed your life, and that's great. The trouble is that what you believe in isn't actually real. Now, what do you call people who believe in things that aren't there? And the answer is mad people. So what they're saying is, Michael, you are insane. But the main thing is that you are happy and insane. And I'm happy that you're happy. As a matter of fact, I'm so desperate to know the kind of joy in my life that you seem to have in yours. I would like to embrace insanity just to join you. And I wish I could do it, but I just can't turn my brain off in the way that you obviously succeeded in doing. So, but I'm happy for you. And that's how we often sometimes think what faith is. It's somehow believing those things which we're unsure is true, and therefore strong faith, and really strong faith, is believing in things which you know aren't true, but you're still able to make yourself believe them. But that isn't actually what the Bible means by faith at all. Now, apart from the fact that faith was originally a verb and became a noun, started to be used as a noun during the Middle English periods in the English language, but we won't go into all of that now, although maybe I'll digress and tell you one story because it's from Cambridge, and I was making this point at Emma, a college here, if for some reason you're not connected to the university, but you're here, many years ago, about the verb faith and how even the verb faith was used during the Middle English period by both Chaucer and Shakespeare. And when I sat down at the high table afterwards, I don't think he was the head of the house at the time, but there was a professor of Middle English there who looked at me rather disdainfully and said, "You're completely wrong about the verb faith, you know." And I was saying that the verb faith meant you're sure something is true and real, so you put your whole weight in it. And that's what the verb faith meant. And he said, that's not correct. And I said, well, look, you're the professor of Middle English, and if I made a mistake, I apologize. Anyway, after the dinner, they gave me the option of ordering the dessert wine, and I said, well, why don't we have a nice Sauterne together? And we had, I have to say, a rather excellent Sauterne. And then a week later, a case of Sauterne, the same Sauterne, arrived at my house. And if you don't know what Sauterne is, then don't buy it, it's already too expensive, it doesn't need any more demand. But this amazing case of Saturn arrived with a letter of apology from this professor of Middle English who just said, my memory obviously failed me that day you were talking. He said, after dinner I went and checked the college dictionaries, and sure enough, you were right, I photocopied the entries for it, and by way of apology, I'd like to send you these 12 bottles of wine. And I can remember thinking, anytime you want me to come back to the college, I'm more than happy. I'll put extra research in to find something else that you may not know at that point or remember. This could work out really well. Anyway, why was I telling that story? Oh, yes, faith. Faith described this action of putting your weight or trust in that which you're sure is true and real. And that's the only sense in which the Bible actually uses the word faith. So in another book of the Bible called Hebrews, it says, without faith it's impossible to please God. And therefore, rather importantly, if you want to please God, you need to know what faith is, which is very useful because it says without faith it's impossible to please God. And faith is. That's handy, isn't it, that it's in the very next sentence. And faith is, knowing that God is. Well, that's a statement about reality. It's not hoping he is, wishing he is, thinking he is, dreaming he is, wondering if he is. Knowing he is, and knowing that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. In other words, he's trustworthy. He's true to his promises. You can rely on him. He's actually worthy of being trusted. There's a moral quality which is right about trusting him. And that's faith has always been biblically connected to those categories of truth and reality. And therefore, strong faith actually comes, the more of that reality you know and the more sure you are about the nature of its truth, the more you can trust it even when you're unsure about other things. And so faith biblically isn't something which grows in the face of ignorance or lack of understanding. You actually need to come to grips with truth and reality in order to be able to have it in the first place, which is one of the reasons why the Christian Union here are organizing these ongoing meetings over the next couple of weeks to allow this ongoing discussion. Is this true? Is it real? There's a book written in the back of this room by a friend of mine called Peter Williams. He's principal of something called Tyndale House here called Can We Trust the Gospels? And it's available for free. I don't know how many free copies are left. He is rather brilliant, I have to say. I can't remember exactly how many languages he speaks, but it's an awful lot. It's quite annoying, really. But he wrote this book. It's just come out quite recently, so it's actually completely bang up to date, which is why I'm recommending it, which actually looks at, well, what is the evidence that Jesus Christ existed? What is the non-Christian evidence outside of the Bible? Well, in terms of archaeology and other stuff, how do we know he actually existed? How do we know what he said? What has been written about him in the Gospels and Luke and so on? Do we know it can be trusted? Have the words been changed? Has it been altered over time? And so if you're asking those kinds of questions, they're all entirely legitimate questions. You have to get to grips with them, and you can take this for free. I think there are only 7 or 8 copies left, and I'm now holding one. So would anybody like this particular one for free? You can have it. It means that you get it. Here you go. It's yours. Congratulations. Now, by the way, don't treat books like that. I'm only throwing it around because it was written by my friend Peter. Otherwise, I'd have walked down and handed it to you. So we have to answer those kinds of questions. But there's also something else I've either been struck with while I've been here this past week is the number of conversations I've had with some of you guys from all kinds of different disciplines and backgrounds about the idea that God maybe feels a bit distant. And so it's one thing to talk about, is he there? There's another question about, well, how do you know that? Can you know that? Well, what would it mean for that to feel different to what it actually does now? And as we talk about what is faith and trust and why we need it, I'd like to put it into that kind of category, if I may. Now, the reason for wanting to do that is whenever you think of any form of relationship, especially one that feels distant, there are 2 questions you need to ask. And if it's God you're asking it about, you either think, well, is there something wrong with me, or is there something wrong with God, if it's possible to actually know him? And there's a different thing there, which there comes back into this definition that we see in Hebrews, therefore. It's one thing to know that God exists. The next question is, well, what kind of God is he? What's he like? And you may discover that maybe you don't want to know him, after all, once you've answered that particular question. But you have to know that he's both there and actually what he's like, what his character is. Now, personal relationships require 2 people. You need 2 persons. All forms of loving relationships require at least 2 people. You may have noticed that. I know some guys wake up in the morning, put gel in their hair, look in the mirror, sigh, and go, I'm in love. But that's sad. Love is a quality that exists between personal beings. But you need to have both the capacity for it, therefore, as well as the necessary conditions to actually experience it and know what it's true. So that then raises 2 rather interesting questions in terms of relationship with God. Number 1, the nature of me. Is there something potentially wrong with me? Is that why I struggle to feel or make some kind of connection? I was taking a taxi in London several years ago, and I got on the back of a cab, and I told the lady where to go, and she immediately set off to deliver me to the address, and she was capable of sustaining a one-way conversation. The taxi journey took about 20 minutes, and for the first 15 minutes, she talked, and all I had to say was, oh, ah, like that, and she just non-stop talk. It was incredible. And then as she was talking about 7.5 minutes into the conversation, she said, oh, and I had someone in the back of my cab from Goldman Sachs yesterday, and my ears pricked up because I've got a brother who works for Goldman Sachs. It's interesting how the world has changed. 20 years ago, you could share that piece of information and people would be impressed. Now they think you're related to Satan. But my ears pricked up because my brother works there. And she said, and I asked him, are you married? And he said, no. And I said, why aren't you married? And he said, well, because if I get married, someone will want half of my money, and then they'll divorce me and take half of my money. So I've decided I don't want to lose half of my money, so I'll never get married, she said. And she's talking so fast, at such speed, she finally has to take a breath. And as she takes a breath, I say, gosh, that's a bit sad. I said, how about you? And she said, well, I used to be married, but not anymore. And then she began to tell me her whole life story, and she said how she and her husband both worked the night shift, and they would work all through the night, and because that way they could earn more money, and eventually they were able to buy a house, and then they began redoing the house, and they redid the kitchen, and they redid the living room, and they redid the bathrooms, and then they built a patio outside, and then they built an outdoor barbecue, and I started laughing to myself, because when I moved to England, having lived in the Middle East most of my life, first thing I did when I moved to Oxford was build an outdoor barbecue in my garden. I have no idea why. You can't use it. It's always raining. I have a theory about this, is that we build them as monuments to hope, and we look at them, and we say, one day I will be able to use that thing. And she said, I finally had the house I always wanted, but I wasn't happy. And she said, and that's when I fell in love with the guy who sold fruit and vegetables in my local market. And I left my husband 2 years ago, and now I've been living with him. And so she paused, so I said, well, are you happy now? And she said, no. She said, I used to think there was something wrong with my husband, but now I'm beginning to wonder, is there something wrong with me? And that was a very interesting question, I felt. And since she was sort of roughly my age, I said, tell me, when you were at school, did you have to do religious studies? And she said, yes. I said, do you ever remember reading Sermon on the Mount? And she said, I do. It says, blessed are the poor, blessed are these, blessed are those. She said, yeah, I remember that. I said, do you know what the word blessed means? And she said, I haven't got a clue. And I said, well, it's a hard word to translate into English. It contains with it the idea of life joy. It means a satisfaction and joy in life that goes beyond the superficial to the very core of existence. And she looked at me and she said, well, do you know that kind of joy? And I said, well, to quote another Christian, I said, I can honestly say that before I became a Christian, there was a lot of joy on the edge of my existence, but a pain and a sadness in the center of it. And after I became a Christian, there was this joy at the center of my existence, even though I knew a lot of pain and suffering around the edges. And we arrived at the destination. She said, can I talk to you a bit more about that? And I said, sure. And she left her meter running. And in the Bible, it says people shouldn't seek to make a profit by telling other people about Jesus. I don't have a problem with that. But there's a difference between that and being charged to share it with someone else. It's not quite the same thing. But there is this very profound question about, is there something wrong with me? Now, this is very controversial, but according to Jesus Christ, according to the Bible, all of us in this room were made in the image of God. We all bear his image. There is a sacredness about every single life in this room and a preciousness to it. And that means, therefore, that when we violate that sacredness and we do that which is wrong, it's not just something, an action that happens outside of ourselves. It also impacts us. It actually affects us. It actually diminishes us. It makes us less than we really are. When men and women first rebelled against God and sinned, it's not that something new came into this world. It was something that was lost out of this world. If you want to create darkness, what you do is you don't turn it on. I don't know, do you ever read any Dr. Seuss books? I love Dr. Seuss. They have a torch and they have a dark. One puts a beam of light and the other one just takes all the light out. But if you want to create darkness, you just have to shut out the light. And when we turned our back on God, we shut out the light, and we now find ourselves that we have lost something. But it affects who we are. We've lost something right at the very center of our existence. Several years ago, I was speaking in Memphis, and while I was there, someone said to me, you should really go see the Civil Rights Museum. And so I went along, and I had this very bizarre experience where we parked the car, and I'm walking towards the Civil Rights Museum, and I'm thinking, I recognize this place. And I'm looking at the building, and I'm thinking, I've been here before. But I'd never been to Memphis before, and I was very confused until I suddenly realized what I was looking at. What I was looking at was a building whose picture I'd seen in history books, because the Civil Rights Museum is located in the hotel, the balcony of which Martin Luther King was standing when he was shot. And so that's why I could recognize it. I hadn't been there before, but I was just so familiar with the architecture. But I'll never forget being in there. There was one particular picture that I just stood in front of for a long time. It was a massive, blown-up black and white photograph. And it was a group of men coming out on strike from a rubbish collection point, or I guess if you're American, any Americans? Refuge collection, is that what, I don't, refuge collection? Anyway, there were guys who collect rubbish, and they were coming out on strike. But as they were coming out on strike, they were all wearing a big square sign hanging around their neck. And on that big square sign were 4 words, and it said, "I am a man." And the reason the picture was so striking was here was a group of people going on strike, not for better pay, not for better conditions, but to be recognized as being human. Equally human to everyone else. And that was incredible. The effect of sin in this world and in our lives is that it literally dehumanizes us. It makes us less than we really are. That's why you'll see, if you ever see one of those tragic incidents where some kid gets kidnapped, the police will counsel the parents before they appear on TV, and they'll say to the parents, look, when you're appealing for whoever took your child to return them, don't refer to them as him or her or they. Use their name. Say, Michael is a lovely boy. We love Michael. If you get to know Michael, you'll see how sweet he is. Forgive me for talking about myself, but it seems the safest illustration in this point. But they'll say, use the name. The reason is this, is even for a psychopath, it's harder for them to kill a person than an object. So if they can personalize you in that person's mind, then they may buy another couple of hours, that makes sense, before that person can bring themselves to kill you, in which they may be able to find you and rescue you. Sin has this incredible depersonalizing impact in this world and on our lives. And when we therefore violate that sacredness that's right in the very center of us, something goes wrong with us, and we actually become, if you want to use a fancy word, ontologically diminished. We become less than what we're intended to be, less than who we truly are. And although there are lots of things we dabble with in this world because we think that they're really not very important, or they don't matter, or maybe it's just a bit of harmless fun, which is probably how most people think about pornography these days, there's actually something much more profound going on. Because the relationship between two people is one of connection. If you were to say to me, Michael, I hear that you work for a Christian organization, do they treat you well? And I were to say to you, well, I've been employed by them now for 23 years, and I realize that they've been using me this entire time. If that was my answer to your question, you would understand me saying something very seriously bad about them. That makes sense? That is really terrible. That's probably just about the worst thing I could possibly say. Because I'm not an object to be used, I'm a person. The relationship between you and an object is one of consumption. You consume it for your pleasure. Does that make sense? Or for your need. I'm thirsty, have a drink of water. That's the relationship between you and an object. The relationship between two persons, two people, is one of connection. And this is one of the dangers of something, therefore, I feel like with something like pornography, for example, is it reduces people into objects to be consumed for our pleasure. It actually begins to make us less than what we are. And as we become less, we actually even begin to struggle to make certain types of personal connection. So there are sometimes it's possible to put ourselves in a position where we actually struggle to have relationship with other people. Because we're no longer thinking of them as people, we simply see them as objects, and we're happy to use them and discard them. And so there is this whole question when we ask about, well, what is it that's going on in this world in our lives? We sometimes feel that we've lost the capacity to actually have relationship. That's one of the impacts. Now there's another aspect to faith, trust, why it's so important. Not just in terms of who we trust to tell us how we should live our lives, because it's important to who we are. It also affects all of our relationships as well. All of our relationships are morally governed. There was a fascinating TV program that was made, I think it's now being reshown on Netflix, called Lie to Me. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's based off the real-life research of an Oxford academic called Dr. Paul Ekman, who discovered that when we lie, there's a universal set of expressions that we all have. So regardless of where you were brought up, what your background is, your history, what part of the world you're from, when we lie, there's a set of universal expressions on our faces, and if you can learn to read them, you can tell when people are lying to you. Well, it wouldn't surprise you to learn this guy's made quite a lot of money now from his research, advising both companies and also government security services around the world how to detect lies. It's why when you watch spy movies now, you see cameras zoomed in on people's eyes and on the corners of their mouth and parts of the face, looking for these micro-expressions which he discovered actually exist. And it was a sad thing about Lie to Me. They only made 2.5 seasons. It was about halfway through the 3rd season, the whole show got cancelled. And I was talking about this once, and I said, I can't believe they cancelled that show. And afterwards, a guy came up to me and said, hi, my name's so-and-so. I was the producer for that TV show. And I said, you were? I said, why did they cancel it? I said, I loved that thing. It was so thought-provoking. He said, that's why we cancelled it. Nobody wants to think when they're watching TV. He says, there aren't enough people like you. He says, so the audience wasn't big enough. And this just goes to confirm one of my pet theories I have about the world, that the total amount of intelligence in the world is fixed, but the population's been steadily growing. And so it's a fascinating program, but what is interesting was, if you start to read some of Paul Ekman's work, you realize that not only did he become interested in detecting lies, he also became interested in the impact of lies, as you would expect for someone who's given over his whole life to a deception. And here's one of the things that he wrote that I found really stimulating. He said this. He said, trust is a matter of faith, that the person you trust won't exploit it. Intimacy in close working relationships, romance and or friendship requires and in fact depends on trust. Yet it is well known that the last person to realize that he or she is being betrayed is the person suffering the betrayal. Why? Because the betrayed person's trust blots out all recognition of the signs behind that breach of faith, all the signs that everyone else so easily picks up on. We don't want to learn that our trust is being betrayed, that our children are stealing from our purse. It's terrible to discover our trust has been misgiven, and so sometimes we'll willfully avoid any clues to its discovery. Once someone's been betrayed, however, can that relationship ever be restored? Not always, and not by everyone. Even when the betrayal is forgiven and the betrayed person doesn't want to give up the relationship, it may be very difficult to ever learn to completely trust again. That is the price of lying about serious matters, the loss of trust that is never restored. Suspicion, on the other hand, the opposite of trust, undermines relationship and results in the suspicious person's misery. Let me just say that again. Suspicion, on the other hand, the opposite of trust, undermines relationship and results in the suspicious person's misery. All of us face choices. Do we, based on faith, take the risk of being misled by trusting? Or do we take the risk of not only disbelieving a truthful person, but never being able to establish close connections because of our chronic suspicions? Now that's remarkable. Faith, trust, is the quality which is at the heart of every single relationship. And there are 2 elements to it, therefore. One is our own actual capacity, the capacity within us to actually sustain and have a relationship, not to reduce other people into objects, but to see them as other people to connect with. But then there's a second bit too, which is about being able to trust someone, making that moral judgment, and then entering into that relationship with them. And when Jesus came into this world, what he was saying was that the human race has 2 basic problems. Because of the violation of that sacredness that God has given to us, we are both diminished from within. We are actually suffering from the capacity, a lack of capacity for a certain type of relationship. And if we go very far down that line, we may lose it altogether. And also at the same time, our relationship that we enjoy with God, the intimacy we should have with him, well, because of that violation of faith, also breaks that connection with him too. Now, what I find fascinating is, if you take that as a backdrop, is to look at one encounter in Jesus Christ's life, which I'm going to do. It's in the Gospel of Luke, these little books which you have here, which you do take one so you can follow it on if you want to. And it starts right at the bottom of page number 24. And what happens is Jesus is invited to go and have dinner with somebody. This Pharisee invites Jesus to have dinner with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. Just to by the by, since I've been talking about Peter Williams and he's very much in my head, this is obviously a translation. And what it says in the text is he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined. The words at the table aren't actually there in the original text. We put them in the English translation because if I were to say to you, I'm going to come to your house and recline, it sounds a bit weird. Either I'm inviting myself to come and have a snooze, or maybe I've just got a great stash of pots somewhere and it's just going to be a very relaxed evening. But it does sound a bit strange. But in the houses of the time, you didn't have tables. You had cushions on the floor when you went to eat at someone's house. when you would arrive, you would wash your feet. You would sit down on your feet because it's very rude to show the sole of your foot to somebody in this particular culture. You just never would do that. And you would lie on one side, and you need to know which side to lie on because there's a rule about hands, and you reach over into the middle of the table and you eat. You take the on the floor, sorry, all the food is put in the middle of the floor, and you take the food from the floor. Does that make sense? It's on plates, obviously. So that's what it meant. He went and reclined. He reclined on the cushions and he partook of the meal that he'd been invited to. And a woman in that town who'd lived a very sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came with an alabaster jar of perfume. And as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. And then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Now, the bit that we're going to gloss over here that's a bit too easily is the fact that she has an alabaster jar. Alabaster jars are porous, they leak. In a very hot climate where water is scarce and bathing can't be done, if you're working as a prostitute, you can't bathe and shower after every encounter with every client. And so you would wear an alabaster jar, a small little porous jar, it leaks. You put in it a very expensive type of nard, it's like a solid form of perfume. You hang it around the neck, the body heat slowly melts the nard goes into the pores of the alabaster jar, and it perfumes the whole body. It's the basic tool of the trade, and it is amazingly expensive. And so she takes this jar and she smashes it at the feet of Jesus Christ, and she puts it on his feet. And when the Pharisee who'd invited Jesus saw this, he said to himself, if this man, talking about Jesus, if this man were a prophet, he would know who was touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she's a sinner. And what this guy's thinking is this, look, Jesus Christ is working miracles. Strange things are happening. Lame people can walk, blind people can see, dead people come back to life. There's a small question that this could be more than just a man. As a matter of fact, even more than just a prophet. Because he's wondering, could this be the Messiah? Is this God come to earth or not? Well, if it is God come to earth, the one thing that this guy knows is he will know everything about everybody. And if he knows everything about everybody, if God knows everything about everyone, there is no way he would allow a woman like this to touch his feet. Now, there's also another little play on words, we won't go into it, but hapto, the verb to touch there, is the same verb you use when you touch a flame to a fire, to light a fire, and it can have a sexual connotation too. But let's just leave that aside. So this guy is looking at Jesus, trying to figure out who he is, and he says, if Jesus really were a prophet, he would know who this is, he would know what she is, and there's no way he would allow her to do this. And Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Now, this is very interesting. The guy speaks in his head. That makes sense? He's not saying this out loud. He's saying in his head, little thought bubble, if Jesus were a prophet, he wouldn't allow this to happen. And Jesus looks at him and answers the question he's thinking in his head. That's pretty impressive. Anyway, he says, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender, Jesus said. One owed 500 denarii, roughly, let's say 500 days' wages. The other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both of them. Now, which of them will love him more? Now, that's a very interesting question, isn't it? Jesus is saying, 2 people find themselves in debt neither of them can pay. Both of them are forgiven everything which they owe. What will their response be? And the answer is, well, they're going to love the person who forgave them, that someone did so much for them. And then the next question is, you see, who will love the most? Who's going to have the greatest amount of love? And Simon replied, his name's Simon, you can see it there in number 43, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt. Well, no surprise there. Jesus then turned towards the woman and said to Simon, now, it's very interesting when you're reading speech. I don't know if you've done this. I'm sure some of you are much more dramatically gifted than I am. But whenever you're looking at a play or even reading a novel or you're reading anything, tone is very important, right? I mean, tone changes everything. It's not the same. So if I come up to you and I say, hi, okay, that's not the same as hi. Okay? Now, it's the same line, but actually tone makes a pretty big difference to what that word actually means. Now, in this particular instance, we know exactly how Jesus is speaking. Jesus turns to the woman, so he's looking at her, and he's addressing Simon. Do you think he's shouting at her, yelling at her? So while he looks at her, he's speaking to him, and he says, do you see her? I came to your house, and you gave me no water for my feet. Yet she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss. But this woman from the time I entered did not stop kissing my feet. You did not pour oil on my head, but she's poured perfume on my feet. And therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. Now what's going on here? Look, in every culture of the world, there's a little routine when you go to visit somebody. Okay? In England, it goes something like this. You come up to the front door, they open the door. You say, hello. And then, come in. Then you say, may I take your coat? Remember, it's cold, wet, as normal. Okay? May I take your coat? You hang it up. Then you say, would you like a drink? Okay? And when you give them a drink, you say, please sit down. Okay? So let's suppose you've been invited to someone's house for dinner. They say they've got friends. You knock on the door, they open the door, they look at you and they go, oh, it's you. They walk off. They don't offer to take your coat. You find your own drink, and then you wonder where you have to sit. How welcome do you feel at the house? And the answer is, not very. Jesus goes to this house at this guy's invitation. A couple of things are meant to happen. You arrive, the first thing you do is you kiss, because that's how you say hello. I talked about this a couple of days ago, but for those of you who weren't here, you hug and you kiss on the neck and the cheek, multiple times. That's why if you go to church in the Middle East, when they say we'll all offer one another a sign of peace, they all go around hugging and kissing each other. You kiss 3 times, once, twice, 3 times. It was a real shock for me when I came to England and went to an Anglican church, and they said, we will now offer one another a sign of peace. And everybody went around shaking the other one's hands, and you're thinking, what are they doing? A friend of mine came to England and completely forgot where he was, and they said, we'll now offer one another a sign of peace. So he turned around in his pew, and there was a woman behind him, so he leant over and kissed her on the cheek. Of course, she's then meant to turn her head so he can kiss the other cheek, but she froze, so he ended up kissing her full on the lips. And at this point, her husband turned around. I mean, there's a lot of explaining to do. So you come, you're given a kiss. That's how you're welcomed. Okay? The kiss is very important. Then after that, you're given water for your feet. Well, why are you given water for your feet? Look, it's a hot, dry, dusty climate. Okay? Your feet are hot and sweaty, and they're covered in dust. Okay? You've got a lot of animals going up and down, pulling carts, and stuff comes out the back end. It goes very dry, it gets ground up into the dust. Okay? So you're wearing sandals, and you've got dusty feet with stuff encrusted on them. Now, when you recline at the table, you're going to tuck your feet underneath your nice long white robes. Okay? That makes sense. Sit on your feet, lie on one side, and eat. If you don't wash your feet, when you stand up, what do your sweaty, dirty feet leave on the backside of your bum when you stand up? Well, it basically looks like you've had a rather tragic accident. So, when you come to eat, that is why water is provided for the washing of your feet. It's just basic hospitality. It's like, would you like to wash your hands? But no water is given. Now, if you have someone important, if you have someone who is esteemed, valued, you would actually anoint them when they come into your house. Now, depending on how important they are, depends whether you anoint their feet, or their body, or their head, or their hair, and we won't go into all of that. But Jesus does something which is almost unheard of in his culture. He starts to attack the hospitality of his host publicly. Now, you just don't do this. Okay? Please, when you go to the Middle East, you need to be very careful about doing this. I know sometimes in England we like to make fun of people's food at the dinner table and point out that there really wasn't enough, or whatever it was. You just don't do that in the Middle East, not if you want to, well, normally leave alive. So, but Jesus now, looking at this woman, says, Simon, I came into your house, and you gave me no kiss. From the time I entered, she hasn't stopped kissing my feet. She was actually there ahead of Jesus. If I were to say to you from the time I entered this room, it's in verse number 47 on that thing, in the story. If I were to say to you from the time I entered this room, you haven't stopped looking at me, who was here first? You were here first, I came in from the time I entered. Jesus said, from the time I entered, she hasn't stopped kissing my feet. You gave me no water for my feet. She has wet her feet, my feet, with her tears, and used her hair to dry them. You did not anoint me or recognize who I am. And she's anointed my feet with oil. Now, she should really anoint his head, because she knows he's actually a king. But she dare not do that, because she feels so unworthy, she anoints his feet. You see, the problem with the Pharisee is he's so objectified this woman because of what she does, he cannot see who she is. And he now treats Jesus Christ with an equal disdain. And this woman sees what happens when Jesus comes into the house. This woman's already heard Jesus talking about his kingdom. If you read a few chapters earlier in your Luke's Gospel, right at the end of chapter 4, you'll see that Jesus starts talking about his kingdom that has come into this world. She's heard him talking about that. She knows that Jesus Christ has come to give people new life and to forgive them for what they've done wrong. And she's heard that message, and she has repented. She said, I am sorry for my sin. And she's put her trust in Jesus Christ. She's done that already. I'll come to that in a moment as to why we can be so certain of that. She has received forgiveness and new life from Jesus Christ. She hears he's going to go and eat at this guy's house, Simon. So she goes ahead of Jesus into Simon's house. The reason why she can go to Simon's house ahead of Jesus Christ is that all the food is for the invited guests initially, but after the invited guests have had their fill, and in the Middle East you never cook just enough, you have to cook way too much. There must always be food left over. Then all the uninvited guests who came, they're allowed to taste all the delicacies. Does that make sense? Because you have to extend hospitality to other people. It's one of the moral requirements. So here's a way of killing two birds with one stone. You entertain the guest, and because there's no refrigeration, you can't keep the cooked food. At the end of the banquet, all the uninvited guests who listen to the conversation, to benefit from the wisdom that you actually had to share with them, when the invited guests stand up, they now come and they finish off the food. So that's why she's there ahead of it. There would have been other people there ahead of Jesus too. And she sees how Jesus is treated. And when he's given no kiss, no welcome, no honor, no respect, she bursts into floods of tears. And now she's trying to make up for the lack of hospitality extended by the host. He didn't kiss, Jesus wasn't kissed on the cheek or the neck, so she'll kiss him on the feet. She cleans his feet before he reclines. And then she takes the basic tool of her trade, this incredibly expensive jar, and she smashes it at the feet of Jesus Christ. And she rubs this nard, this incredible perfume, into his feet. What Jesus says while he's looking at her is incredibly affirming for her. He's saying, she is trying to make up, Simon, for everywhere where you have failed. And then he says something really amazing. He says, therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven. Do you notice it's in the past tense? Jesus isn't saying, hey, this woman did lots of nice things for me, so now I'm going to forgive her sins. He says, Simon, her many sins have been forgiven. Everything that she has done wrong, she has repented of, and they have been forgiven. She has now known forgiveness in her life, and she now knows a new life, which is why she has such great love, as her great love has shown. And then Jesus said, your sins are forgiven. And therefore I tell you, her many sins, which are many, have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. And Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven. And the guests now begin to say among themselves, who can forgive sin? Because all the guests are now looking at this thinking, wait a minute, who does Jesus Christ think he is? Who is Jesus Christ to give this woman a new life and a new start and forgive all of her sins? And the answer is, he's the Messiah. He's the Son of God. That's why he came into this world. That's why he went to the cross. That's why he was willing to pay for all the stuff that you and I have done wrong. He literally wrote the check to get us out of the debt that we're in. That's exactly what he's done for her. He's forgiven all of her debts. But here's the irony in the story. Simon, this very upright guy who people would have looked at and admired, is in an awful lot of trouble. Jesus Christ is not teaching there are some really horrible people in this world, and when they're forgiven, they're going to be really enthusiastic for God. But other people will be forgiven by God, but they really haven't done anything wrong. And so they'll have like a mild appreciation of God, but not much more. That's not what he's saying. This guy Simon thinks he's basically okay, but he's in more trouble than he can possibly imagine. He's just invited God into his house for dinner. And in front of all of his friends, he's publicly insulted him, refused to acknowledge him, refused to welcome him, refused to honor him, refused to greet him, and treated with him contempt in front of everybody. If there's someone in this room who needs more forgiveness than it's the woman, it is him. But at this point, he's blind to it, which is why Jesus now calls him out in front of everyone else, not out of hatred, but out of the hope that he will realize what's gone wrong in his heart. And he will realize how much he needs to be forgiven. Christian enthusiasm in life doesn't come from developing some kind of psychological fanaticism for God. It comes from realizing just exactly how much damage has gone in here. The fact that we all are sinners, something has happened, has made us less than we are. And that we've actually violated and broken so many other relationships around us, and God comes in and he's willing to forgive. When you receive that forgiveness from him, you fall desperately in love with him. And two things then happen. Number one, your life is changed. I can remember just before I became a Christian, I was wrestling. I said to some friends of mine, I said, look, imagine life is like a swimming pool. I said, and I'm in the shallow end of the pool, and all my friends are there, and I'm really enjoying myself. And when you ask me to become a Christian, it sounds to me like you want me to get up out of the pool, walk along the edge, and jump into the deep end. And I don't even know if I can swim. I said, maybe I'll drown. I said, maybe I'll be eaten by sharks. I've always had a great imagination. And the guy I was talking to looked at me and said, Michael, I've been a Christian for 14 years, and I haven't drowned, and I haven't been eaten by sharks. But if you stay in the shallow end of the pool of life, all you'll ever experience will be this much of it. And that's what prompted me at that point to go away to the top of a very tall mountain called Mount Olympus and chain smoke my way through 40 cigarettes, while I then contemplated what I wanted to do next. Which way did I want to go? Was I going to say yes to Jesus Christ or not? And I sort of came up with a plan, which was I'm going to say yes, I'm going to become a Christian. But I was going to try and manage the damage. So I came back from the very top of the mountain to where this particular campsite was, where these Christians were, and I said, okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to my friends. All of my friends were not Christians. And I got them together, small group, and I said, look, I know we all came on holiday with these guys, but I've actually decided now I'm going to become a Christian, and I'm telling you now, because from now on I won't be enjoying myself anymore. I said, I just want you to know. And that's what it felt like inside. I felt like I was about to sacrifice on the altar of truth the only hope I had for happiness in this world. And then I went and found some Christians, and I said, okay, I would like you to pray with me. I would like to say yes to Jesus. I'd like to become a Christian. And so they explained a few things to me, and then they prayed with me. And then, much to my amazement, far from sinking into the depression I was expecting to enter into, I was filled with this joy that I couldn't explain. So much so that I then thought, you know what, when I get home, I'll have to limit some of this by, I won't tell anyone what had happened to me. I'll keep it secret for a few weeks while I figure out what I'm going to say. So when people say, what's happened to you, I know what to say. Well, that didn't work. The very first person I got to see was a 6'1" model who was one of the reasons I didn't want to become a Christian in the first place. I had a sneaky suspicion that if I became a Christian, God was going to interfere in the plans that I actually had for me and her. And we met one morning, and she looked at me, and the first thing she said was, "You're different." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Something's happened to you." And she said, "Tell me what happened." And I said, I'm not sure I can. She said, "Well, try." So I said, I became a Christian the other day. And she said, "What does that mean?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure, but I know I'm a different person." And she leant forward, looked at me, and she said, "Would you like to sleep with me?" And I remember looking at her and saying, if you'd only asked me about 30 hours ago, the answer would have been yes. And then I was amazed at what came out of my mouth next, because I said, but actually today the answer's no. And I just began to realize how deep that change had gone. When you say yes to Christ, he pays your debts. Your debts are forgiven. But then he also changes your heart. And you begin to live differently. It changes everything about you. I began to realize how much I began to treat other people as objects around me to be used. I came from a very rich background. We had an awful lot of money, power, influence. In many ways, I had an amazing start in life in terms of all of the opportunity that you could be given. But it also can breed within you a certain type of arrogance in the way in terms of which you treat other people. And at that point, I suddenly realized just how much I owe Jesus Christ. He completely changes you. He actually makes you being worthy of other people being able to put your trust in. Because I would have said you would have been crazy to trust me before I became a Christian. I had the air of respectability. The crazy thing was so many people did trust me. But, I wouldn't have trusted me. My father trusted me. He realized he made a mistake when I accidentally sank his car in the river, but that really wasn't my fault. I probably had more blame with the cinema a friend of mine accidentally set fire to when we decided to find out a film was as flammable as we'd been told, and the answer is yes. But now, all of a sudden, it was becoming someone totally different. It's the last night that I'm here, and it's the last opportunity I have to talk with you this evening. And so, as we have done at every evening so far, I want to give you the opportunity to make some kind of response to this. Because as we've said every evening, one possible response is to say, I don't think this is right. I think what you're saying is actually wrong. And we are given the freedom to make that choice, to make that response. We're really happy that you decided to come. We really hope that maybe you'll continue to look into it, you'll continue the conversation. It's also possible to be unsure and think, well, look, I'm only just hearing about this, I'm trying to figure it out. And in which case, definitely, come along on, to the where to from here. Take one or two of the books at the end, read it. Talk with the friends who brought you here. But I would really love to be able to give the opportunity in the room this night again for anyone who wants to say yes. To say yes to Jesus Christ. God came into this world in the form of Jesus Christ because even though we were created in his image, we've turned away from him. We are less than we're meant to be. The Bible calls it fallen. We're less than we were ever intended to be. We have diminished the capacity for relationship, and we're actually now prone to all kinds of folly in all kinds of strange areas. We actually need someone who can make us new, make us a new type of creation, give us a new heart. That's what Jesus Christ came to do. We also need someone who can restore and forgive what's happened in terms of all of what we've done and all the broken relationship that it manifests itself in. And again, that's what he came to do. That's what he actually achieved and won for us when he went to the cross. Was paying the price for all of that to get us out of that mess. And if you're sitting here today and you know that your heart needs to be made new, that you need to become someone, this different person that Jesus has always intended for you to be, then I'd like you to say yes. I was quoting from the book of Hebrews earlier about the definition of faith. There's a very other interesting thing that comes about that same time in that same book. It says that we shouldn't despise God's discipline. Now, it's not very popular to talk about discipline anymore, because normally when we talk about discipline, we imagine someone with a big stick. And when you talk about God's discipline, that's a really big person with a really big stick. But the word discipline there, it doesn't mean exactly what you think it is. If you've got a good dictionary, and there are a few in this university, and you go and look up what that word means in the book of Hebrews, it means to put someone in the place so they can function in the way they were always intended to function. So you talk about the discipline of an athlete. Does that make sense? When the coach is training you and putting you through, all the things he makes you do, you may say, and jokingly say, I think my coach is trying to kill me. But actually, the coach doesn't hate you. They want you to succeed. That's why they make you do all of that stuff. They're not telling you not to eat sugar because they're opposed to you. They actually want you to function in the way that you're intended to function. That's what that word discipline means there. That's why it talks about not despising what he has for us. God's plan is to put us in a place where we can function in the way we were always intended to function, to be who we were intended to be. And that, in saying yes, that's what that means. And so I'm going to offer a short prayer once again, which allows us to say yes. Every night we've said a prayer, it's a variation of the same thing. It thanks God for what he has come into this world to do. It thanks Jesus for being willing to lay down his life only to take it up again, but to do it in such a way that provides forgiveness for us and also a new heart. But here's what I'd like to suggest this evening, which is going to be slightly different to what we've done before. We've been looking at this Gospel of Luke here this evening. And if you're saying yes this evening, what I'd like to suggest is that you find the pencil or whatever it is that's nearby you, and you just write that word yes on the front page and take this home with you. Make the next thing you do be to read this. You'll also see that there is little cards, and would love to be in contact with you so that we can let you know about other things which are happening. But we also have something else this evening too. It's a little booklet, and it's called Yes. was written by someone who I got to know a long time ago, who sadly passed away just yesterday. But it's a little book about what it means to say yes to God and yes to Jesus Christ. And if you know you want to say yes and you're about to say yes, or that you want to read this so that you can say yes, do come and talk to me afterwards, or come and find Luna, come and find Hassan if you were here last night and saw him. And there's also Mike Hood, who's up here together with, is it Emma, who will also be up here. He also has some of these. Come and talk to one of us. We'd love to give you one of these. We'd love to also talk with you a little bit more about how we can help. But if you know that you're in a position where you want to pray and say yes, then I just invite you, just as you are, just to pray this prayer with me. And this is what it is. Dear Father, thank you that you do love us. Thank you that you came into this world because you loved us. And I'm sorry for what I have done wrong, both in terms of the broken relationship with you and with others, but also with myself, and how I'm so much less than you ever intended me to be. I thank you that at the cross you made it possible for all of my debt to be forgiven, for me to have a new life with you. And I pray I may know the depth of that my love for you may grow and increase. I want to say yes to your offer today of forgiveness and new life. I want to say yes to you. And I want to say yes to following you wherever I go, whatever the cost. And I pray all of this in Christ's name. Amen. Look, if that was you, please do come and talk to us. We'd love to give you one of these little booklets. Someone was actually even making that prayer for the first time, even as we were starting this evening. Otherwise, I would just like to say what a joy it's been for me to be here with you. You may not feel the same way, but I actually do enjoy this. Some of you have come and asked me some incredibly difficult questions. I promised a few of you some links to various other talks, or even the possibility of meeting various other people, some of whom were professors either here or at Oxford, to answer some of your questions. If you're here tonight and I haven't given you that information yet, do come and find me. And I would also like to thank the Christian Union here for welcoming me, inviting me, looking after me so well, and having me here. And I also want to say thank you in advance to them too, because I know last time I came and spoke for them, you were kind enough to send me a little card and a gift, and I want to say how much I appreciated that. And I know you're going to do it again, so I'm going to thank you now. And let me just say this. Out of all the gifts that I've ever received from anybody, the one you're giving me now is by far the most recent. May God bless you. Have a good evening. Come and talk to us one at the end. Please come and collect this booklet if you need to. Otherwise, thank you very much.